Welcome, everyone. Aureen, thank you for joining us. I will give a quick introduction and then turn things over to you. So, Aureen Pinto Wagner uh, is so kind to join us today. She is you have a long list of accolades, so I will take my time going through them so I can embarrass you properly.
Mhm.
So she is on the Scientific and Clinical Advisory Board for the IOCDF. She is also faculty for the BTTI, which is the Behavior Therapy Training Institute for the IOCDF. So she does lots of training and consultation. She is a clinical psychologist and is the founder of the Anxiety Wellness Center, which is in Cary, North Carolina. So she's local, North Carolinian, joining the OC North Carolina lecture series. Always great to see. She is also the author of several books. We have, let's see, Up and Down the Worry Hill, which is, I think, the one I'm most familiar with. What to Do When Your Child Has Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, Treatment of OCD in Children and Adolescents, and Worried No More. Did I miss any, Maureen?
You
I
got them
did.
all. Yeah.
Yeah, I got them all. Okay. Okay. Thank you. And then, as I mentioned, she also provides training and consultation, both for clinicians and workshops for families and parents as well. So Aureen is a jack of all trades, and we are very excited to have her. Aureen, thank you again, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben, and thank you to OCD North Carolina. It's my pleasure to be here. And as a local state resident, I'm happy that I can participate. I am a clinical child psychologist, like Ben said, and I've been treating children, teens, and adults with OCD and anxiety disorders for over 25 years. And the type of treatment I use is primarily cognitive behavioral therapy. So if you bear with me for a second here, I will share my slides and I will talk about CBT for kids and teens, what to expect, and what parents can do to help, how parents can help. So, CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, and OCD is at its core an anxiety based disorder. So, there's a lot of anxiety involved with it because people have obsessions, which are thoughts that just pop into their minds. They're unwanted and they are upsetting. And because of this upset, they feel the need to do things to get rid of those bad feelings. And that's what compulsions or rituals are. So, obsessions and compulsions are sort of two parts or two components that go hand in hand with OCD. And OCD is considered a more complex and challenging illness to treat. And one of the reasons being that it comes in many forms. It has many manifestations. So it's really hard to kind of narrow things down when the symptoms can manifest in so many different ways. And this is a list here of some of the most common typical obsessive themes. But even within these themes, there can be lots of individual differences in the actual symptoms that people have. And then to make things more complicated, there are also a ton of different compulsions or rituals that people may use. And, you know, this can be a mix and match. People can have multiple obsessions, multiple compulsions. So sometimes it's even hard to track what people have. And sometimes they'll change over time as well. But there's good news. Cognitive behavioral therapy is an effective treatment. So there is a lot of hope for children, teens, and adults with OCD. And the most effective and most powerful technique within CBT is called exposure and response prevention, or ERP for short, where exposure basically means you face your fears, you don't fight them. And response prevention basically means don't do the rituals. So it's pretty straightforward. And ERP is the most effective evidence based treatment for OCD. And here's a little slide that just shows all the data out there with all the citations at the bottom. Lots of studies have been done over the last 25 to 30 years that say ERP has a 60 to 70% success rate. It's even better than medication. Sometimes the combination of ERP and medication is, better than either alone. There's a good deal of symptom reduction with CBT. It's even more than it is for medication. It can be used with even young children, and the gains are long lasting. And it can be used in routine clinical practice. So it's been a well studied treatment at this point, and this is the gold standard of treatment. However, as you might imagine, facing fears is probably the last thing someone wants to do when they're afraid or anxious. And so children and teens come to treatment with a great deal of reluctance. Usually, their parents are bringing them to treatment because the parents are seeing the problem, the school is seeing the problem, the child or teen may see the problem, but it feels scary. And so these are the things I'll hear kids and teens say to me. I don't want to think about it. It's too scary. It'll come true. I don't want to do it. I don't like the feeling. It'll keep bugging me. I just want it to go away, or it's going to be too hard. Sometimes they're ashamed and secretive and they don't want to disclose what they're worrying about or what they're doing. And sometimes they'll even say, you know what? I'm okay with these habits. It doesn't bother me that much. It bothers my parents. So, all said and done, there's, a lot of times a good amount of reluctance, for kids and teens to engage in exposure and response prevention. And therefore, it's really important that CBT be child friendly. You really have to get kids ready for treatment and prepared for treatment and cultivate treatment readiness. And this has been the big focus of my clinical work over the last 25 years is cultivating readiness in kids and teens and making the treatment child friendly so that it's not as scary for them. And so to do that, I really try to prepare them to understand what OCD is all about, what makes it worse, and what makes it better. And so these are some analogies I use to help them understand what obsessions are. It's kind of like a worry bell, like a doorbell in your brain that gets jammed and stuck and keeps ringing and sort of bothers you and pesters you. Or another way to think about it is that it's a false alarm in your brain. And usually, middle schoolers, high schoolers, and adults really relate well to this analogy. And I work with a lot of adults as well. So everyone gets the idea of a false alarm. It's like a fire alarm that goes off, but there's no fire. Someone just blew out the birthday candles. And so it's telling you there's danger, but there really isn't. And then for the little kids I work with, preschoolers and younger elementary schoolers, they really relate well to the analogy of a worry trick. Like your mind is playing tricks on you. Like if I said, look, there's a spider on your head, and they get that that's a trick. And so, they don't have to be scared if they know it's a trick. But if they believed it, they would be scared. So, really helping reframe the obsessions instead of being real truths and dangers, that they are just false alarms and tricks that all of us can have sometimes. But these false alarms and worry tricks are scary. And so then up goes their feeling temperature. And so I give kids and teens this tool, the feeling thermometer that we commonly use in CBT. And this really becomes a very important tool in the treatment because they learn to calibrate their anxiety level. How anxious are they feeling? And is that a clue that it's a false alarm? So if you have to touch the doorknob and your feeling temperature is an 8, but nobody else seems that bothered about it, then is that a clue that your mind is giving you false alarms about the doorknob having germs on it? And then you have to understand what makes OCD worse. We don't know what causes OCD, it's very complicated, but we do know the things that make it worse. And when you understand how they work, you can make it better. So, thoughts, feelings, and actions go hand in hand to make OCD spiral upwards. And when you know how it works, you can, sort of disentangle that and make it better. And this really is the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy, that thoughts, feelings, and actions work hand in hand to make our anxiety worse. So, this is the first part of the triangle, the thoughts. These are the ways in which OCD can make you think. So, I show these slides to kids and families that I'm working with as I'm cultivating readiness. And I ask them, which ones of these are true for you? Read out the ones that apply to you. And many will say, oh, all of them. Or some will say they'll read out 3 or 4 or 5 of them. And I say, look, I didn't make them up for you. So that goes to show that, this is common. It's not just you. How did I know that you had these things? Right? And they sort of feel like they're not alone when they see that other people think the same way. And so basically, what happens with OCD is that there's an overestimation of danger. Something terrible, catastrophic, awful, terrible will happen. There's an underestimation of coping ability. I can't handle it. I don't know what to do. I'm no good at this. I won't be able to do it. Hyper responsibility. I'm a bad person. Doubting. And then an intolerance of distress and an intolerance of uncertainty. People with OCD always are trying to know for sure that nothing bad will happen to them. Unfortunately, uncertainty is a part of life. None of us have certainty about things. So that is something that we all have to learn to deal with. And then when you have thoughts like that, this is how you might feel. And OCD has a lot to do with anxiety, but it also involves other emotions. People, kids and teens get confused. Why am I thinking this way? What's going on in my brain? Am I crazy? Sometimes they get very frustrated, angry, impatient. They feel guilty and terrible. They're ashamed because they have bad thoughts or ugly thoughts. And then often they feel so defeated or beaten by them that they feel hopeless and helpless and may even get depressed as a result. And when you have feelings like that, then this is how you might act. These are the things we all do when we're anxious or upset about something. We try to fix it. And so you might do rituals, you might do silent rituals in your mind that you don't realize or your family doesn't realize. Like you might say lucky words to cancel out something, a bad thought. You might say a prayer to ask for forgiveness because you think you did a bad thing. Or you might say, I'm out of here. I'm not dealing with this. I'm not coming near that table because somebody touched it and they're sick. Or I'm not doing that. Now, here's the thing everyone thinks that when they do these things, they're going to feel better. But here's the reality these are the things that make OCD worse. So, the more you avoid and escape things, the more it becomes a cycle, a vicious cycle of escape. And so, let me explain this. It looks complicated, but it's pretty straightforward. Exposure is when you have to face your fear. So let's take the example of a doorknob. You think there's germs on the doorknob, and you have to go open the door. And so when you have to touch that doorknob, that's called exposure. You're exposed to your fear, there's germs on it. Your anxiety starts climbing. You can't deal with it anymore. And you say, I'm not opening that door. I'm leaving. I don't need to go out. Or you open the door for me, and I'll come behind you, or you use your sleeve to open the door. Those are all different ways you can avoid and escape the fear. And people come up with very creative ways to escape the fear. And when they do those things, they might feel better because the anxiety drops in the moment. However, they fail to learn another way to deal with it. And so the next time they have to deal with the doorknob, what are they likely to do? The same thing. And I will show this graph to kids and teens. And when I give examples from their own life and their own OCD, uh, it clicks for them. They can relate to it, they understand it. And then they begin to see, oh, the more rituals I do, the more escape I do, the worse I'm making my OCD. I'm not making it better. I'm making it worse. But of course, people are doing this because they don't know. They're not doing it on purpose. So it's quite an eye opener for them to realize that the things they do desperately to try to feel better may actually be making the OCD worse. And why does it make it worse? Because it feels good to escape your anxiety. It's a reward. And so it's called negative reinforcement. We keep wanting to do things that feel good and are rewarding. And also, when you keep escaping, you never learn another way to handle it. So there's no new learning taking place. And then this is how parents may feel and act. And I show this to parents and I ask them, which ones of these are true for you? And most parents will say, yep, I do that, and she does that, or he does that. Or some parents will say, between the two of us, it's all of the above. And I say, I have these on a printed slide here, so I didn't make them up for you either. It goes to show lots of parents walk in your shoes. And so, if that helps you not feel alone and isolated, lots of parents struggle because parenting a child with OCD is not something that comes very easily or naturally. It's not intuitive parenting. All right. So now that a child or a teen and their parents know what makes OCD worse, the good news is that with CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, you will learn a new way to handle OCD. We don't have a cure for OCD. We can't make it go away altogether, but you can learn a new way to handle it. You'll learn to cool down your feeling temperature. So once again, this thermometer becomes that focal point of learning how to, when you go up on it and how you bring yourself down. And you will learn that you are braver than you think you are. So I really promote the concept of bravery, that we are all actually braver than we think we are. We can handle more than we think we can. And so ERP basically means that you're going to learn you can change your behavior. We're not focusing on changing the thoughts, we're focusing on changing the actions, the behavior, the escape and avoidance behaviors. You will learn to just notice and label the obsessions as false alarms or worry tricks. Don't fight them or fix them. Do the opposite of what OCD tells you. OCD says, do the rituals, escape, avoid, don't deal with it. And instead, you're going to face your fear. You're going to turn around and do the opposite of what OCD tells you. And you will find out some really cool things. Nothing bad happens. Your fear does not come true because it's a false alarm to begin with or a worry trick. And you'll find out you can handle the bad feelings, which you thought you couldn't. And the more you practice, the more new learning you create, and the stronger that learning gets, and the easier it gets. And so I developed this metaphor of the worry hill many, many years ago in my early work with children and teens to describe how exposure works. So basically, when you're facing your fear, it's like riding a bicycle up a big worry hill. It's tough, you're huffing, you're puffing, you're trying to get up that hill and you want to quit and go back down and escape. But if you stick it out, stick it out, stick it out, then you get to the top of the hill. Then you get to come down the other side and that's the fun part. And then you can say, I did it, I beat it, I'm brave. So here's an example of how exposure might work gradually. The numbers on the right-hand side are the feeling temperatures. So basically, we work with kids and teens and families to kind of make a list of all the different kinds of triggers, break them down into smaller steps because doing gradual exposure is much easier than sort of like doing it all at once, which can be too intimidating or overwhelming. And so then we rank order or put in order the items from least difficult to most difficult, and you can see it's very logical here that little by little this child is doing more things to tackle his fear of the markers being poisonous or toxic. And nothing in exposure is actually truly dangerous. We don't make people do truly dangerous things. We only make them do things that their fear or their obsession is telling them is dangerous, but really isn't. And we make them do things that most people do without much trouble. All right. The more you practice, the easier it gets. So there's no magic in this. It's not a once and done thing. You have to keep doing it like learning any other skill. And most kids these days, they have some extracurricular activity. They do understand the idea that practice makes it easier. You play soccer, you play the piano, you dance, you know, do whatever. The more you do it, the easier it gets, the better you get at it. And so that's an important concept in CBT because you are retraining your brain to have a different response to the OCD. And that does not happen with one or two tries. You have to keep doing it to create and strengthen this new learning. Okay, so what can parents do to help? It's tough for parents because parents are often far more ready for their child to handle the OCD than the child is. But if you push your child, you also probably experience that they will get frightened or dig their heels in or not want to participate because they are kind of too afraid. And so it's very important to think about the OCD team, that we work as a team. And I tell my families that I work with that I'm the guide. Okay, I'm the coach. I'm going to be the best coach I know how. I'm going to tell you the best ways I know that you can learn how to handle OCD differently. But you have to ride the bicycle. I cannot ride the bicycle for you, nor can your parents ride the bicycle. They'll rally for you, and we'll talk about how they'll do that. But we have to work together as a team. And I tell kids and families, I won't actually force you to do anything because I think if you get scared, if you get forced, you feel scared, and then you don't trust, and then you know you're not going to put your heart and soul into it. So if you believe that we are a team and we're working together, then you're more likely to be able to do it. And so for parents, I say first, take care of yourself. You know how in the airplane they tell us, put on your oxygen mask first before you put on the mask of the person next to you. So you have to have enough oxygen because OCD in your child and in your family has probably been exhausting. You're sleep deprived, you're tired. But if you're running on empty, if you don't have enough oxygen, you really can't be there as much for your kid, for your child. So work on some self-care and, work with your therapist or, on your own, but really focus on getting yourself to a better place in order to really be there for your child. And you have to work on bringing down your own feeling temperature. So, if we as adults or parents are angry, frustrated, impatient, critical, judgmental, then our feeling temperature is high. And then we don't respond in the most supportive ways to our child. And our child can really pick that up. And then their stress, when their stress level goes up, then it's harder for them to deal with the OCD. And the parent's role to rally is an acronym: recognize, ally, lead, let go, and yes, reward and praise. So recognize OCD episodes as false alarms for your child. Your child is not just trying to be obnoxious or difficult or misbehaving, but they are really stuck or struggling with something they believe is frightening to them. So recognize it's the OCD, not your child behaving in difficult ways. Ally, be on the same team. If you and your child are fighting with each other, that's not a good setup for treatment. You can lead your child to the ride, so be there to support, to encourage. You'll be the one to get them the right bicycle, make sure the tires have air in them, get them a good helmet, sneakers. You do all those things. You get them started learning how to ride. But eventually you have to let go. You have to let go of that bicycle seat and they have to learn to ride on their own. And then your role is to reward and praise and acknowledge their successes. But you cannot do the ERP for them. You have to support them in doing it for themselves. I encourage parents to spend Yama time, which is like good old fashioned quality time, at least 15 minutes a day, preferably 30, one on one time with no particular agenda, but just kind of hang out. Um, and it's not a time to talk about the OCD or all the challenges, but just enjoy the relationship because OCD takes that away. When OCD is really difficult in the family, everything gets focused on negative interactions, and families lose that positive connection. And children crave that. Teenagers crave that. They won't tell you that, but they do actually. And so you're filling up their gas tank in a planned, proactive way, and it prevents them from kind of seeking negative attention. And it also teaches them to delay gratification because if you schedule Yama time every day, you say, okay, 6:30 after dinner, we have our Yama time. Then, when they come to you at other times, you can say, you know what, why don't we kind of, do that at Yama time? Right now, I'm getting dinner ready, or I have to finish these work emails, or I have to answer these calls, but we'll have time later. These are strategies that don't help. And if you're a parent listening to this, you might say, oh no, I've done all of these. And I will say to you, so will every other parent. And so will I. I'm a parent too, and I don't have a child with OCD, but we all do these things, correct? And why do we do them? We do them because in the moment, sometimes we don't know what else to do, nothing else seems to work, or we're making a good faith effort. But just know that if you do these things, you might still keep doing them. And in the moment, sometimes in desperation, you don't know what else to do. But in the long run, these kinds of parenting strategies don't help a child learn how to tackle their OCD. Instead, what it does create maybe is more stress and conflict in the family. Advice is in one ear and out the other. They're tired of hearing it, and they're not in a position, they're too frightened to listen. Reassurance, you might say, well, isn't that kind of something natural to do? And I would say, yes, it's the most natural thing to reassure your child. But with OCD, you might be reassuring too much. And you know when you're reassuring too much because your child is asking the same question and you've given that answer like 25 times. And it's like a bottomless pit of reassurance seeking. So then that becomes the cycle of escape. Likewise, distraction. You might be surprised to know that distraction in the moment is okay, but it doesn't really help a child learn to face their fear because distraction is a form of escape. Anger, criticism, punishment will make people shut down. Avoidance, if you help them avoid or join in rituals or accommodate, which is giving in, that also is just forms of escape and avoidance. Shaming, pushing too hard doesn't work either. And surprises, people with OCD don't do well with surprises. So if you're introducing any changes, you should always sort of inform them ahead of time so they're not caught off guard because then their feeling temperature spikes. Accommodation is a big issue in families with OCD. It's very, very common. About 90% of families report that they accommodate their child's OCD. And accommodation refers to all these things that people do in an attempt to help their child. So it's meant with the best of intentions, and parents are just trying to do anything to ease the burden of OCD, and so they might participate, assist, modify their routines, and sometimes they don't know what else to do because if your child is going to bed at like midnight or 1 a.m. and keeping the whole family awake, what are you going to do? You've got to do some things. So you might help your child get showered and dressed and ready for bed just to get it going so that you can all get a little bit of sleep at night. So accommodations are very understandable. And so I don't blame anybody or shame anybody for accommodating. I understand why people do accommodations, but you also have to know that in the long run, they also become a cycle of escape and avoidance because the child, whenever they're exposed to a fear, is escaping via the accommodations. And parents may also be escaping their own distress by accommodating, because if they accommodate, then their child is not so upset. When their child is not so upset, then they don't feel so upset either. So accommodations make parents feel better too, a lot of the time. And so it's very important that any kind of CBT treatment plan for OCD should involve an assessment of family accommodation and a plan for reducing accommodations. And I tell parents, don't surprise your child. Don't decide to go home and say, that's it, no more reassurance, we're done with this. That's not going to work, I'll tell you up front. Instead, you should work with your therapist to make a plan with gradual steps, and your therapist will tell you the right timing to introduce these steps, and will explain to you why and how to reduce accommodations. And then once you make the plan, it's very important to stick with it and then to reward and praise when your child does it. So here's an example of an exposure plan for reducing an accommodation of mealtime reassurance, where a child is repeatedly asking, did I eat the right amount? Is this going to be enough calories for me? Is this healthy? Am I going to be okay today? Are you sure? Can you check again? So just lots of questions at mealtime. And the parents are answering them because the child just won't eat and they need that child to eat and go to school. But we're gradually going to cut down the number of questions and answers. So just having a structured plan works really well with a lot of children and teens. And you can see the numbers on the right-hand side are the feeling temperatures, so least difficult to most. And the tasks, the exposure tasks get more and more difficult. But usually if you do them in this gradual manner, the child or the teen does them really well. And you always want to praise, and they can earn bravery tickets or points for doing each step. Okay. And then it's very important to have some realistic expectations. And so I will address some common concerns and questions that come up for parents. How hard will it be? How long will it take? Or we've been doing this, it doesn't seem to be getting any better. Maybe it's even getting worse. Now we're seeing new rituals, and this OCD just doesn't make sense. It's so frustrating. And finally, what if it comes back? We've done all this. What if it comes back? So let me answer each of those. How hard will it be? That's a question I get. These are questions I get all the time from kids and families. And I say, well, it's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, you wouldn't be here talking to me, would you? You would have done it yourself. So, yes, anyone who comes to see me comes because it's hard. And so you're going to be learning to do something hard. But the more you do it, the easier it gets. You're learning new skills. When you first took your first piano lesson or had to play soccer or, kick a ball or something, that was hard too. Everything is hard when you're learning something new, but you get better at it. There's nothing dangerous about it. And perhaps, you think it's going to be hard, but maybe it's not any harder than your life is right now. How hard is your life right now? It may be easier than you expect. How long will it take? Again, I'm not sure. I don't know. Everybody's different. And so everyone's treatment is very personal, very individual, and very tailored. We have some general estimates. So generally, I tell the families I work with to give it at least 4 to 6 visits before you even make a judgment about how it's working. And that doesn't mean that you'll be all okay in 4 to 6 visits, but it means that, it's too early to even think about is it working or not, until you give it that much time. And so I tell them about the Aesop's fable of the tortoise and the hare. Slow and steady wins the race. Sometimes it looks like there's no movement, but that tortoise is moving slowly, and eventually we'll get there. You've just got to stick with it. There's no magic, no mystery, no secrets, no surprises. It's very straightforward. You have to persevere and keep at it, and you'll get better. And you have to practice every day by doing a daily brave challenge. And brave challenges is what I call exposure tasks. What if you say it's not getting any better, right? Sometimes treatment can, be up and down, fits and starts. Sometimes it seems like it's 2 steps forward and 2 steps backward. There's no straight line of improvement. But instead, what you want to be looking for over a period of time, so give it a month to 6 weeks, is 3 trends. Is there a decrease, a general downward trend in the frequency, the severity, and the duration of symptoms? The frequency. My child used to wash their hands 20 times a day. It's not gone completely, but now we're down to like 12 times a day or 10 times a day. The frequency's gone down. The severity. When they washed their hands, they were like a 9, 10, crying, screaming, saying they had to get their hands cleaned. And now, a lot of times it may be 5 to 7. They're not like a 9 or a 10 all the time. They're not panicking. And the duration. A hand washing session would take 15 minutes, and now it's down to like 5. Okay. So that's what you're going to see is a gradual decrease in things rather than dramatically everything's gone. Parents sometimes say, we went home and did what you said and it got worse. And I say to parents, and of course, I prepare them for this so that they're not totally, shocked or, caught off guard, but it can get worse before it gets better. Why? Because your child has gotten comfortable with operating a certain way, especially if you're accommodating and assisting and helping. And so as you start to make changes, that's difficult for your child, and they will try hard to keep you helping them, or they want you to help them, do their rituals, and they resist that. So for instance, it's kind of like if your child was eating a box full of cookies and you said, that's enough cookies, you can have an apple instead. What's your child going to say? Thank you for making healthy choices on my behalf. No, your child's going to say, come on, just one more cookie, right? So children will usually beg for a little bit more of something that helps them. The other thing can make it worse is if you surprise them. So don't surprise them. Surprises don't go over well. Children are more likely to respond appropriately when they are prepared for something. So do planned exposures rather than surprise exposures. Although later on in the treatment, when they're on a roll and they're seeing success, then it's very important to also introduce surprise exposures so that they're better prepared for real life surprises. You might say, now there are new fears. I thought we got over this germ thing, and now we have another new thing, walking through the doorways a certain way. Well, that is the nature of OCD. It has a waxing and a waning course, which means it gets better, it gets worse, it goes up and down. The symptoms can morph and change over time. It's kind of playing a whack-a-mole game, and sometimes the triggers can change. A doorknob may be bothersome today and maybe not tomorrow. Maybe something else is bothersome tomorrow. And parents will often say, it just doesn't make any sense. There's no logical sense to this. And I say, yes, you're right. You're absolutely correct. OCD does not make any sense. The rules of OCD are idiosyncratic. They don't actually make logical sense to anybody. So don't even try to understand it logically, and don't try to use logical rules to convince your child otherwise, because it really is not an issue with their logic. It's an issue with their distress and their anxiety. Okay, and so with exposure, we're teaching them how to handle the distress and the anxiety, and we're not really working so much on the logic because that doesn't actually help OCD. And so reframe and externalize instead of saying, oh, my kid's driving me crazy with this behavior. You would say, I understand it's the OCD, not my child. My child doesn't want this either, but they feel helpless about it. And then finally, what if OCD comes back? We've done all this hard work. My child is better. Can we cross our fingers and hope for the best? But we're really afraid. We don't want OCD to come back. And I say, you know what? Like any challenge in life, things can sometimes get better and sometimes get worse. So you should just expect that you'll come to bumps in the road. We all come to bumps in the road. No matter how well you ride your bicycle, you'll still come to bumps in the road. And when you do, your bicycle might wobble, you might fall, and then what do you do when you fall off the bicycle? You get right back on that bicycle. Any kid can tell you that. And so we make a plan because there isn't an official cure for OCD. But when you've learned all these strategies, you can handle it so much better that it just becomes background noise rather than something that dominates your life. So expect bumps in the road, expect OCD to come back, especially at times of stress and change and transition. Put them in perspective and say, I knew this was coming. I knew, it could happen sometimes, so it's not such a big surprise. Don't quit. It's the only way to fail. Pick yourself up, get back on that bicycle and ride the worry hill again. Celebrate your successes and then plan for future bumps. So think ahead and say, when's the next time, the OCD might get me because I'm kind of stressed out or I've got big changes coming in my life. And I also tell parents, even if OCD comes back, it should never be as bad as it was when you first started. And why is that? Because you have learned so much about how to handle it that you didn't know before. So when you first started, you had no idea what was going on and you had no idea how to handle it. And now you've got all this new learning that you can use. And so even if it seems like, a big relapse or a bump in the road, you should be able to kind of, get back on track and get back on that bicycle pretty quickly. And so, with that, I will say that these are just general guidelines. Don't diagnose anyone with OCD if you're not qualified. Do not treat someone for OCD if you're not qualified to do so. And also keep in mind that CBT, even though it's the best treatment around with a 60 to 80% success rate, there still are about 20% of people for whom it's not enough. And there are many reasons for that. And they might need other forms of treatment in addition to CBT, and that even at its best, nothing works for everyone. That's just kind of one of those rules of life. All right. And so, with that, I hope that you'll be able to help your own child or in your family think about riding up and down that worry hill and finding CBT that works for your family. Thank you very much.